Hello, welcome to the MiniMapCast. My name is Jeremy. You might be looking at this going, "Where's Kerry?" It's like, "Where's Waldo? Where's Kerry?" Oh, I should actually put him. I should put him in one of these little buildings up here. That'd be funny. The MiniMapCast is changing a little bit. You'll probably notice by at least the runtime, and also the fact that we said we'd take a month off, and we took what ended up being a month and a half off. Partly because I ended up just getting quite ill and had a rash all over my shoulders and neck, and decided that I didn't want to be on camera while I had a rash on me. But the MiniMapCast is changing. We said it was going to change last year, and it has. So first of all, where's Kerry? He's still here. He's still around. The podcast is not going to be the main thing that we do anymore, because that was never the point. And it's a better use of our time to not make it the main use of, or like the main content pillar for MiniMap. So the podcast is changing. Kerry's not going to be on it all the time. He might still jump in here and there, but it's not going to be a thing that is going to be a regular, consistent, both of us being on it all the time thing. The show is now being bumped to be a fortnightly thing, or bi-weekly if you are from the northwest of the world. It is going to be shorter. We're not going to be doing 2-hour episodes anymore, 3-hour episodes anymore, where we accidentally go to bed at like midnight or whatever. That's not sustainable, and it's not really a great use of our time. So the show is changing. It's going to be a fortnightly show. It's going to be on Thursdays now. Still going to stream it. This one isn't streamed, but only because I'm still throwing it all together last minute. Like, had to rearrange my room again to get everything set up. Couldn't be bothered doing it live stream today. Going forward, in 2 weeks, it will be live streamed every Thursday afternoon from about 6:30, 7 o'clock. Aiming to hit a 7 o'clock start time. It'll go for about an hour. There will be a much less of a pre-show, much less of a post-show. And also when we're on break now, we're actually going to go on break. It's not going to be I'm just going to stop doing the podcast, but I'm still going to be on camera, because it turns out that's not a break. That's not how that works. So that'll be a thing. It'll be a every 2-week thing now. And on top of that, with a sort of on the other Thursdays that the podcast will not be on, I'm still hoping to want to do sort of a live show thing, kind of a much more ad hoc, just jump in, play some games, maybe talk about whatever's happened in the past week, maybe just give it like one or two impression of things, but it's going to be a lot looser. It's not going to have like an itinerary. It's also not going to be a consistent every other 2-week thing. Sometimes if I've got, say, like a review that I want to put out and I want to spend that day actually writing instead, I'm not going to put this live show thing as a higher priority than actually getting a piece of content out on the website, because that's the biggest reason that this podcast is sort of taking a lower position in the hierarchy of importance for the things that we want to put on the website, is because we want to do more other stuff. We want to do more previews, more reviews, more other pieces of just opinion articles, blogging, other stuff, experiment, sort of have some fun. And this often would sort of use up a lot of our energy, especially because we were doing it earlier in the week, which was there were reasons we were doing that in the past, which are just purely logistical. Moving it later in the week, I think, will give myself at least a bit more of a bit more room to get some other stuff done earlier in the week and not feel immediately drained because of the stuff that happened, because of running this show on a Monday. And hopefully we'll also allow the show to feel a little bit more reactive to the week that has just happened, as opposed to like, oh, there's a thing happening on Tuesday, there's a thing happening on Wednesday. We're not going to know what that is until then. So the podcast is going to feel a little bit out of date, which is hilarious saying that, as in about 14 hours or so, Xbox are going to publish an episode of their podcast, which is going to detail the future of Xbox's plans going forward with Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond and all that stuff, it's just hilarious that was a decision that we made, that in the hope that we wouldn't have pending news looming over the podcast that was going to happen after the thing recorded, and that happened almost immediately, which is hilarious. So yeah, that's kind of the state of the site for now. It's been nice to have some time off through the beginning of the year rather, which is hilarious considering that in my time off I wrote a review which is on the website for a video game called Bantam Nights. I'm in the middle of writing another review for the Prince of Persia, the Lost Crown, which is amazing, by the way. I finished it just the other day. And we've got other stuff coming as well. I want to do Foam Stars reviews, for example. So, if you don't know, this is the MiniMapCast. It's a podcast about video games. MiniMapCast is a fortnightly video podcast that goes live every Thursday evenings, aside from today. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you tell your friends and give the show a positive rating wherever you listen to your podcast. Makes a huge difference, and it only takes a few seconds. Want to get notified every time a new episode is released? Make sure to follow us on social media. We are at MiniMap on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and also Twitch, where the MiniMapCast goes live every Thursday night at about 6:30 Melbourne time. Subject to change. MiniMap also wants to say thank you to Shook for letting us use the Moog Model D Improv as the music for the MiniMap cast. You can listen to more of Shook's music at shook.bandcamp.com. And finally, MiniMap is completely independent and funded almost entirely out of our own pockets. To help keep the mics and lights on, you can support us by becoming a patron. For only $5 a month, you can know exactly what you are... For $5 a month, you can know that you are indeed supporting the show, and you will also gain access to some of our special bonus features, like taking trips down memory lane, where Kerry and I watch old E3 coverage from yesteryear. Head on over to patreon.com/minimapau to help us out. And remember, it is cheaper than a latte with oat milk. Turns out the month and a half off in between doing the last episode of the show and this episode, coffees have not gotten any cheaper. In some areas, they have gotten more expensive. I can't see that happening anytime soon, that coffee will get cheaper than supporting us. So why don't you just support us once a month instead of getting your 10th coffee for the week? So welcome back to the MiniMapCast. We are here again in 2024. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk about today. Mostly just sort of two things that I've been doing recently. One of them is I've been playing Control, and I finally finished Control after I finished Alan Wake last year. Finally went back to Control, finished that, and started playing some of the DLC. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the thing that I did want to start off with is looking ahead to this year, as I did at the beginning of the show. I also wanted to start to look ahead at sort of where all the big players are sort of sitting. I know it's February, so we've already sort of had some movement in that space. I thought about making this show about the three big players, Nintendo, Xbox, PlayStation, sort of where they're at over the next 12 months. But considering that we're about to get a whole bunch of information about Xbox, some of it's sort of leaked here and there about games like Hi-Fi Rush making its way over to PlayStation and Switch. And we understand that there's going to be a lot more of their games making their way over to other platforms. And I think there was a report from that Andy Robinson posted on VGC or Video Chronicle. I forget the name of the outlet. Talking about how they a lot of Xbox employees were told today ahead of the announcement for the plans of Xbox for the future, was that they should be thinking about every screen as an Xbox, which is sort of a continuation of their Play Anywhere sort of scheme with, play Xbox Game Pass on a TV, on your phone, yada, yada, yada. Every screen is an Xbox. We don't really know what that means. Probably links into their Keystone project, but we'll find out more about that tomorrow. And on top of that, Nintendo, It's February, which means there'll be a direct at some point this month. They've been doing that for the past 6 years. I can't imagine they'll change it, considering that they've got a handful of games that are going to come out between now and the announcement of their new hardware. This will probably be the last Nintendo Direct whenever it's announced for the Nintendo Switch, and then the one after that will be their big presentation announcement of, hey, here's the Nintendo Switch 2, here's the Super Nintendo Switch, whatever it is. But PlayStation. There is some information that has come out about PlayStation in the past 2 days. Mostly, a lot of this is coming from PlayStation and Sony held their Q3 financial 2023 consolidated financial reports, which is a big report about big report, which is about their 3 months that ended on December 31st, 2023. There's a couple things that are of really, really big interest in here. One of the things is that when talking about the hardware of the PlayStation 5, this is a quote from the report, "It will enter its 5th year since launch, and partially due to its entering the latter half of the console cycle, we aim to optimize sales with the greatest emphasis on the balance of profits," blah, blah, blah. They're talking about the PlayStation 5 entering the latter half of the console cycle. Not latter stages, which is what some outlets have been accidentally misquoting. It's entering its latter half, so it's second half of the hardware. This is kind of weird, I think. There's not because the time frame doesn't match up, because it sort of does. Like, it was 2021 or 2020 when the console came out. Where a 4-year half cycle, an 8-year full cycle of this hardware feels a little bit odd, I think, not because that doesn't feel like it's enough time, but I think people are sort of looking at the PlayStation 5 going, okay, there are some quite good games on there, but it hasn't felt like it's got a complete library, at least in my opinion, that has made this be a really standout console when you would look back at it. There's been a lot of like third-party games that are really good, and depending on how tomorrow goes, we're going to get a bunch of Xbox games being added to it at some point as well. But like there have been games like Spider-Man 2 just came out, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, and a handful of others. The new Ratchet and Clank, like they're good, but they're not 3 Uncharted games and a Last of Us, 3 God of Wars, or 2 God of Wars, whatever was on the PS4. On the PS3. It's in a funny spot, and I think because a lot of the games that they've been pushing over the past 8 years or so, a lot of the Jim Ryan era of games, which is coming to an end also at some point this year. Those games have been big, AAA, high budget, high production value games that are, intensely cinematic, primarily single player focused, but also part of that prestige culture of game that they've been I think that they've been emulating for quite a while now, and they've started to sort of rope a lot of their other IP, stuff like God of War, to make it sort of fit this prestige style of game. The style of game that was more popularized with games like The Last of Us, very cinematic, very heavily story focused, with a touch of more grounded gameplay, I think is how I want to describe it. Not that those games don't have their big grandiose moments, but a majority of their games are about the people that are in them and how gruff and high fidelity and dirty a lot of their gameplay has been. obviously not. They haven't all been like that. We're still getting games like Astrobot. Like Jeff Grubb was tweeting today that there's a good chance we might get an Astrobot game this year. And Spider-Man is sort of towing the line in between that prestige thing and also like comical combat. It's not quite leaning into comic maybe as much as we would want. It's sort of a step back closer to MCU stuff, but it's still doing its own thing. And Ratchet and Clank obviously is another one where it's like, this is just a straight, full-on Ratchet and Clank game. There's no minimal UI here or sad moments where someone gets hit in the head with a golf club. Not that that's innately bad, but it's just that's what they're going for, right? However, another quote, just a couple paragraphs down from that one that I read prior in this financial report says, regarding first-party software, we aim to continue to focus on producing high-quality works and developing live service games. But while major projects are currently under development, we do not plan to release any new major existing franchise titles next fiscal year like God of War Ragnarok and Marvel's Spider-Man. Now, this is quite interesting. I was talking to Luke from Checkpoint the other day about the year ahead, talking about PlayStation, talking about what they've got for us. And I've also spoken to Kerry about this recently as well. Like, what are we expecting from them this year? We've got Helldivers 2 just came out, published by PlayStation. That game is doing really well. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I really want to. I will over the next couple of weeks, so you'll probably hear me talk about that in a couple of weeks. They've also got that Rise of Ronin game that is coming out. It's not developed by them. It's developed by Team Ninja, but it is published by them. Team Ninja, not Ninja Theory, which is, I always get them mixed up. But I didn't this time, which is great. That's being published by them. They'll publish probably a couple other Bandai Namco games, but we're not going to get a major existing franchise title between now and I think it's April of 2025, which is wild to me. Not because I think that they're all incredible and I think that we really need them right now, because I sort of don't and I sort of don't. But they've been operating on this intensely high budget, everything needs to hit and it needs to hit hard sort of mentality and business model for quite a long time now. I've spoken a lot in the past, but I think it's a really good example. The reason we're not going to get a Days Gone 2 is not because Days Gone 2 wasn't a very good game, even though I think it wasn't. It's not because it wasn't popular and didn't find its fan base, because it did. It's because it didn't hit the levels of an Uncharted or a God of War or even Ratchet and Clank, honestly. That game isn't it's not a game where you can see potential for 3 further Days Gone games over the next 20 years. It's just not. And so that's sort of where they're operating in at the moment. They need games. They need the scope of the games that they are currently making need to hit in a way that is, as I've described for quite a long time, I think quite unsustainable, because then you end up with the stars eventually will align in a way that will allow them to have a year where there will be no major new addition to any of their major franchises for an entire year. They've obviously got their hands in other areas as well. They purchased Bungie like I think 18 months ago now or something like that, and so we're now starting to see we're leading into the final shape, which is going to be the final major expansion for this saga of Destiny 2. That'll be probably the biggest thing that Sony will get out of Bungie for the next couple of years, short of Marathon, which is also struggling quite a lot. the Naughty Dog live service game that has recently been cancelled, and there was a whole big news cycle about that. That is, I think, also like they obviously felt like they didn't really want to make that game, but the other part of this quote is that they are developing a lot of live service games. We're going to start to see that, I think, not this year, I think next year, and I think we'll get a couple of them, and I think they might accidentally shrink themselves out, because I don't know which ones from where we should be expecting over the next year. What I think this surprised me was that, not that, like it was a little bit surprising in the sense that I can't believe they're actually going to go a whole year without a new major existing franchise title, but I actually expected to get at least one, which in my mind is the one that would be, I guess, closest to us seeing it, us starting to hear about it, which would be Ghost of Tsushima 2, or whatever it ends up being called. Because I'm not expecting anything from Naughty Dog, especially after what happened. Insomniac are just kind of chugging along. Like, there's a whole bunch of information about what they're working on that's out there. I'm not going to go super into it. Timelines change. I guess whatever they've been working on that was meant to come out this year, I guess has been pushed. That's fine. And a handful of the other studios, like, you don't immediately know what you're going to get with thing like Bend. You don't immediately know what you're going to get now with Media Molecule changing shape. So the only one I was really and we're not going to get the next Horizon game this year, considering Forbidden West came out really not that long ago, and DLC came out even sooner. Ghost of Tsushima seemed like the next logical step, and we're not going to get that at all in the next year and a bit, according to this financial report, which I just found a bit surprising, honestly. What else? Like, there's a lot of rumors around what they're going to be looking at in terms of hardware. There was some rumors recently about them starting to look at like another PlayStation Vita. I don't personally see it. Maybe they want to enter that market against Nintendo and the Steam Deck and the Roger Ally and all those other ones. I don't see them looking at that going, we can really make a splash here. I can see them looking at that market going, let's get our games on PC so that we can roundabout way enter that market that way. The PlayStation Portal, I think, has been, it's just out there. It's just kind of released. It's obviously not a standalone piece of hardware. You need to have a PlayStation 5 to run it. But I think it's kind of dipping their toe in the water to making their console and their ecosystem more able to be experienced in more places rather. But it's not really much of an entry in that area, so I don't super know. Like, I still don't really know why that thing came out, but I don't see them looking at the PlayStation Portal and going, yeah, the next thing we want to do is actually make another handheld that is dedicated to running PlayStation games and games that are in the PlayStation ecosystem. It just seems a bit it just doesn't make an immediate sense to me. Plus, with the outgoing current head of PlayStation, Jim Ryan, and then the new whoever replaces him coming in at some point, I think it'll take a little bit before we see what's like what that vision is going to be. There also was a quote from I believe it was the chief operating officer. I'm just going to quickly pull that one up because I think that was also quite interesting. Okay, so what I was talking about was reported on by Takahashi Mochizuki, who is a reporter from Bloomberg. Published some articles on Bloomberg about this. I'm mostly going to be reading from his Twitter account, from some tweets that he posted as a lot of this earning call stuff was coming out. What he says is that Sony says PlayStation 5 hardware sales in October to December quarter fell short of its plan for 25 million sales, cut their current financial year PS5 sale goal to 21 million from 25 million. PS5 is entering, as we said before, the latter half of its life cycle, and the PS5 hardware sales slowdown is ahead. Also mentions that no new title releases from big existing PlayStation franchises is planned for the next financial year. Also said that Sony said that the drastic price cut on the PS5, similar to what Sony did to the PlayStation 4, is difficult as room is limited to cut production cost of the PS5 compared to the PS4. I assume that's because the PlayStation 5 production, obviously things are more expensive to make right now than they were back then. However, there's a lot more intricacies to the PlayStation 5, like the liquid cooling solution and a whole bunch of other stuff, and it's just different shape. Means that it's just a more expensive thing to manufacture, including things like chip shortages that we've experienced through and post COVID as well. However, the thing that I meant to mention before from Sony's chief operating officer, this is a quote. "It's been 4 months since I became the chairman of SIE, which is Sony Interactive Entertainment. A big problem of SIE is that I found they don't necessarily have a deep understanding of how their work is being translated to growth, generation of sustainable profits, and higher margin for the unit as a whole." He then goes on to say that I see more analysts saying Sony needs a PlayStation 5 Pro before the launch of Nintendo's next-gen system, which I'll get to in a moment. The chief operating officer mentioning that SIE doesn't have a deep understanding of how their work is being translated to growth, generation of sustainable profits, and higher margin for the unit as a whole is really, really fascinating. I think that this lines up with some of the information that we've been hearing over the past year that they're going to be transitioning to making a lot more live service games. Hopefully that doesn't mean every studio has to make a live service game. We have seen Naughty Dog obviously saying we tried to make it, it didn't work, and their statement saying that Naughty Dog arrived at a crossroads where we can see that we would only be making live service games or making the games we really want to love, and they chose the latter, which I think was a good decision overall. Hopefully that means that studios are not going to be forced into making live service games if they don't want to, as we know from games like Marvel's Avengers, Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, that other Babylon's Fall from Square Enix, that a lot of these games probably would have been better games if they were not so live service focused and heavy on microtransactions and seasonal content and all this stuff. I'm not saying that the studios didn't want that, but I'm saying that definitely the publishers did. So I think it is fascinating that the Sony COO is being so frank talking about this and about how there isn't a tremendous amount of understanding with what works and what doesn't. I think that also makes sense in the sense of them going and purchasing Bungie, because they've been making with overall success, apart from the past 12 months, obviously with their tremendous amount of layoffs and their incredibly inflated targets, that for the most part, Destiny 2 has been quite a successful game for the studio. They survived being under Activision, going independent, still releasing the game, and then being acquired again by PlayStation. So there's understanding there that Destiny and perhaps Marathon, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. Probably another live service thing, we don't really know. As well as some other projects, we can see that they want to start moving into this area. Personally, I think that's not going to work out for them in the way that they wanted to, because you can't just make a Fortnite, which is, I'm sure, what everybody wants, right? You can't just say, "Oh, I'm just going to make the next Fortnite thing." Like, it doesn't quite work that way. You can't just have a live service game just suddenly make you a whole bunch of money. How many live service games have we seen over the past 6 years, that have been around for a couple of seasons, started to wind down, and then just fell off the face of the map? Anthem, I think, is a really good example of that, where EA were definitely looking at that going, we've got the people who made Mass Effect and Dragon Age, and we're going to get them to make a new IP, which is really exciting on paper. And that new IP is going to be about people in mechs, which got me really excited at the time. But it's going to be really intensely live service, and it's going to be all online and all that stuff. That game was shuttered in a developmental sense before they could even have their 2.0. Let's really, really dig in and try and make this a thing that people are going to love. That hasn't worked. That's a similar story in a lot of places. There will be failures from this decision. Not that the other direction is guaranteed success, but live service games that are sustainable and profitable to an extent that a studio would like to see, quarter on quarter growth is really hard to do. And those games fail more often than they succeed. The final thing about PlayStation as a whole this year, because again, it's kind of, a lot of this report is kind of just putting it in a position where we're not going to really expect much from them this year, I guess. We'll get a bunch of third-party stuff. We will get probably some new IP, because it explicitly mentions about the no games between now and next year. That's about major franchises that already exist. There'll probably be some new IP stuff. I doubt that Astrobot is considered a major franchise by PlayStation. So we'll probably see, maybe we'll see some returns to some of their previous franchises. Like, I would love to see like a new Wipeout, or I'd love to see a return to something like maybe like Starhawk or some deep cut, Jak and Daxter, maybe Ape Escape. Give me something from their backlog that we haven't seen for a long time. I'd love something like that, a new take on one of those old series. But I think we're probably just going to get a lot more Sony published third party games over the next, or like I guess second party games over the next financial year from them. But yeah, just touching finally on their Takahashi Mochizuki's note about that he's seeing more analysts saying Sony needs a PS5 Pro before the launch of Nintendo's next gen. I don't understand this argument at all. I really don't. I don't see how the bottleneck for PlayStation being the computer needs to be better. Like, I've not looked at any PlayStation 5 game and went, oh, I really wish this looked better. Right? Like, their games are, like, a lot of their games, their high fidelity games especially, they look incredible. God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, visually, they're really stunning looking games. There's some issues with readability, as people have noted, where the higher fidelity you get, the less readability you have. But we've got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth coming out in a couple of weeks. I'm not looking at that game going, wow, they're really, pushing their head against the top of the console in terms of like a power draw. I don't know what a PS5 Pro really does for this console. They need more exciting, more games, smaller games that are a bit more creative, perhaps. Humanity, I think, is a really great example of that, where it's from the folks that, it's from Enhanced Entertainment, the folks that made like Tetris Effect and Rares as well, I believe. That was a really cool, really interesting puzzle game. That is, look, it's not a tentpole release for PlayStation. It's not a game that's going to, set the world on fire and is going to get a HBO adaptation and is going to have, Timothy Chalamet saying that he's playing it on the red carpet for Wonka 2 or whatever. That's not that game. But it also doesn't need to be that game, because it's not, $800 million and half of that going to marketing. They need to remember why a lot of their games were so popular, and it wasn't always about being the biggest game in the world. Shadow of the Colossus and and some of their other, like, the Ratchet and Clank series, they weren't games that were like, oh my god, this is going to be the greatest game, or rather the largest game that has ever been made. But they're stuck in this awkward loop of every game needs to be another Spider-Man, every game needs to be another Uncharted, right? It's quite awkward. And I hope that they don't look at the PS5 Pro and go, this is what everyone needs right now. Because I just don't see that being it. That's my feeling on PlayStation for this year. I'm sure we'll see some stuff from them. We'll probably get maybe another update on the controller. Hopefully, some more additions to their like streaming service, Game Pass equivalent, or PlayStation Plus. However, I don't super know what to expect from them this year, because they've had their anti-eclipse where, like, it's the everything is lining up for there to be a gap in their release timings. So yeah, so that's PlayStation. The final thing that I want to talk about for this episode is Control. I went back, as I said at the beginning of the show, I went back to Control. I finished Alan Wake 2 last year, and to be quite honest with you, I need more, right? I've had this urge and desire to be in that space more. As I get further from rolling credits from Alan Wake, the more I think it was just so cool and so creative, and in a lot of ways quite innovative. And I want to feel like I'm in that space again. And I'm, like, I'm lucky enough that Alan Wake 2 is going to get a couple of DLCs. I don't know when they're coming out, but like Sam Lake is talking about them quite explicitly. About the first one is I forget what the first one's about. The second one is explicitly about Control and the FBC and the oldest house and all that stuff. And yes, before you run to the comments and tell me, yes, I know that they did add an additional, that the New Game Plus version of Alan Wake 2 is different and has got some additional stuff added to it and some changes, and I will get to that at some point. I just didn't want to immediately go back and start that game from the beginning again. So I decided to do the next best thing, which is return to Control. Been playing the PS5 edition. Loaded up my old save from whenever the PS5 edition came out, which I think is 2021? Or no, 2020 even. 2019? Was it No, that was when the game came out. 2021 I think is when the PS5 edition came out. Loaded up my old save, figured out where I was in the story, which was about maybe a third, maybe a bit further than a third, not quite halfway. And I just sort of gave it 3 hours every other day while I was also getting through Prince of Persia. What a cool game Control is. It is playing it at the same time as another Metroidvania, but not as another side-scrolling Metroidvania, I think helped. Where I was in that mindset of, I'm playing a Metroidvania, I need to get to the next, bonfire, whatever it's called, to make sure that I'm not gonna die and then lose a bunch of progress. Returning to areas with abilities, better weapons, etc., etc. The story of that game is quite fascinating. It took a turn 3/4 of the way through for light Control spoilers when you meet your brother and you finally have that moment of reconnecting, and that like awkward, like, oh my god, is he okay? What is going on with him? And you find out more about the hiss and all of that stuff, and finding out more about Trench as well, who was the director of the FBC prior to Jesse, who was the main character of Control, coming in at the very beginning of the game. But what I found strange was that I didn't expect the ending of the game to creep up on me quite as quickly as it did. It was surprising when the credits rolled, I think, for me, honestly. When it actually happened, I was quite shocked. And spoilers again, no, I'm not talking about the fake out that you get. I'm talking about the actual credits. I expected maybe another perhaps 40 minutes of the final event happening, I guess. A bit more combat, a bit more boss fight, perhaps. But I think overall it's really cool. I then, started to explore a little bit more after I rolled credits, because I expected a bit more, so I decided, well, I'll just give it a bit more. And it turns out there's actually quite a bit of story that happens after the game when you're cleaning up stuff and they react to you finishing the game. People's positions have changed. Everybody understands that the ending of the game has happened, and the game continues on from there. So there's some more side stuff happening after that. But what I really wanted to do actually was get to the Alan Wake DLC in Control. Something that was very cool was that I expected it to be a slower burn than what it was. I expected it to be about an hour or so before people are explicitly talking about Alan Wake, what happens in Alan Wake 1 and in Bright Falls and all that stuff. But what I did is I looked at my quest log and I saw the one that mentioned the dark place, and I was like, well, that's clearly the Alan Wake quest. So I enabled that, said, I'll go over to this elevator. So I walked over to the elevator, hopped in, pressed the button. The moment I walked into the elevator, Alan Wake, with his beard and his long hair, sitting at his typewriter, was immediately on screen in the FMV overlay that is often used, used quite a lot in Control, but is used even more in Alan Wake 2. And suddenly I was immediately back into the Alan Wake universe, right? Not that Control is hard separated from that, especially less and less as more properties have come out. But it was very, very quickly my name is Alan Wake, I'm a writer. And I was like, oh, okay, we're straight into this. We're not fucking around here. We are immediately into some more Alan Wake content. And all I could think about was, if Alan Wake 1 was one of my favorite games back in 2010, I didn't play it back then, but if it was one of my favorite games and then got American Nightmare and got one or two pieces of extra content here and there was that TV show and I think there was a comic or something. But then you had nothing for a long time, and you had Sam Lake explicitly making a video saying, we don't have the money to make Alan Wake 2. I'm sorry, we can't make that project right now. Then Quantum Break happens, and there's a wink and a nod here to Alan Wake, but it's in its own universe. It's not in the shared Remedy universe that they're slowly making. But then Control happens, and there are more explicit references to Alan Wake in Control. You can find notes talking about Alan Wake and Thomas Zane and some other stuff, and talking about how that they think what happened in Bright Falls is an AWE. But then suddenly this DLC, if that's the first time that you've had Alan Wake content for a long time and you immediately are thrust back in, I cannot imagine how exciting that would have been for fans of that series. And I think it's quite a good middle ground in between Alan Wake 1 and 2. They talk to things that happened in between those games, and a reaction to those events of Alan Wake 1, which are from a different perspective, I think is interesting, from the perspective of the FBC. But also, they set up a lot of the events that happened at the beginning of Alan Wake 2, talking about a couple of FBI agents. One of them, named Alex Casey, is going to Cauldron Lake. Obviously, the old gods of Asgard are in Alan Wake 1. Sorry, in Control, rather. They are there, in there's music, and Artie the janitor is another one. But they really set up Alan Wake 2 in this DLC. And to know that there's going to be a reverse connection in the Alan Wake 2 DLC, which is about the oldest house, rather, I think is quite exciting. It's quite exciting to be a fan of those games, as I now have become, which I'm glad about because they are extremely my shit. So yeah, I'm having a good time. I haven't finished the DLC yet. I've heard it's quite short. I could probably finish it in a single sitting, but I only started it after I'd just done a big chunk of the final chapter of Control. Yeah, it's cool. It's a cool franchise, and Remedy are in an exciting place right now. I don't know what their live service game looks like, Vanguard, which is what I believe it is called. I know that they have teased it ever so slightly in Control, just with a couple of references to the explicit word Vanguard. However, I don't know what a live service game from Remedy looks like. It's not been a thing that they've worked on before, and like realistically, it's not super what I need from them again. And that's not to say that I think all live service games are bad. I want to be very clear that while I was poo-pooing the idea of PlayStation really focusing on it, and I'm not super jazzed about the idea of Remedy working on it, there are live service games that do work for me, but it has unfortunately become a thing that a lot of executives can look at and go, oh, this will make us money. Warner Brothers is in this exact position where they want almost all of their projects going forward to be live service experiences, which I think is, I think that's a terrible idea, and it's not even the worst idea that David Zaslav has had over the past year. Anyway, I digress. That does indeed bring us to the end of the MiniMapCast. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you listen to next week's episode, in next fortnight's episode, where I'm sure I'll be talking a bit about probably a Nintendo Direct that would happen between now and then, and probably also what Xbox announced tomorrow, and then perhaps some other stuff that I've been playing. Will Final Fantasy be out by the time that happens? Perhaps. It will be the day Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out, so I would have at least started playing it. To make sure you don't miss out on that, make sure you follow us on all the social media accounts, which is at MiniMapAU, and on Blue Sky as well. You can follow us individually. You can follow me on Twitter at Obi1Jez, on everywhere that isn't Blue Sky, which is jeremy.minimap.com.au. You can head to minimap.com.au for absolutely everything else Minimap related, including the Minidisc podcast and some other articles. The most recent article that went up on the website is the Benson Knights review that I did earlier this year. I am writing a Prince of Persia review, so that will be up at some point soon as well as a Foam Stars review and some other stuff as well. Next week I will be streaming the live show, so if you enjoyed it and you want to stick around, make sure you can catch us on Twitch. It'll be about 6:30 Melbourne time for that one. And lastly, if you enjoyed this enough, make sure you follow us on Patreon. If you want to keep the lights and mics on, you can do that by heading on over to patreon.com/minimapau, and for $5 you'll be able to support us as well as get some other fun goodies as well. Thank you very much for listening to the MiniMapCast. I will see you in 2 weeks.